Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into something that is, quite literally, a matter of life and death for maritime professionals. We're going to be decoding the newly revised IMO MSC 581-110 guidelines for enclosed space entry and rescue. So we're going to break down these new rules, translate all that heavy regulatory jargon into real, actionable survival tactics, and give you a crystal clear visual roadmap for staying safe at sea.
But first, let me ask you this. What do you think is the deadliest space on a ship? You know, it's actually not the deck during a massive storm. And it's not the engine room either. The real answer, it's a space that looks completely normal, entirely calm, and completely empty. Because the absolute greatest threat that maritime crews face today is invisible. It's totally silent, and it gives you zero warning before it strikes. So let's map out exactly how we're going to understand and ultimately defeat this invisible threat.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the invisible threat. Then look at the MSC.581-110 new rules, walk through safe entry procedures, discuss the fatal rescue urge, and wrap up with mandatory equipment and training.
All right, jumping right into Section 1, the invisible shipboard threat, because you simply can't fight what you can't see.
Look, I know safety explainers can sometimes feel like dry, boring compliance checklists, right? They often lack those real emotional stakes. But understanding this highly hostile environment is literally about making sure you and your crewmates actually get to go home to your families. So what exactly is an enclosed space? Well, it's defined by three main things. It has limited openings for getting in and out, the ventilation is inadequate, and crucially, it was never designed for people to be in there continuously. We're talking about cargo holds, ballast tanks, void spaces, pump rooms. But here's the kicker. Danger also quietly lurks in connected spaces. Think about areas like forecastle workspaces or stair trunks that just happen to share a boundary with a hazardous cargo.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to listen to this exact, terrifying quote pulled straight from the IMO guidelines. One deep breath of 100% nitrogen gas will prove fatal. That right there is the uncompromising reality of what we're dealing with. When a space is inerted with nitrogen, or when oxygen is just naturally depleted, like from the rusting of bare steel or cargo oxidation, your margin for error isn't measured in minutes. It's literally a single breath.
And tracking carbon dioxide or CO2 danger levels reveals a pretty grim reality. Organic cargoes, things like wood pellets, timber, even scrap metal, they quietly absorb oxygen and emit heavy, invisible CO2. And since it's heavier than normal air, it sinks and pools at the very bottom of these spaces, like right at the base of a ladder. At just 5,000 parts per million, you've hit the absolute maximum workplace exposure limit. By the time it creeps up to 40,000 ppm, you're facing permanent brain damage, a coma, or even death. And the scariest part is, the space will look completely normal right up until the second you collapse.
Which leads us to Section 2, the MSC.581-10 new rules. This is your new survival playbook. The maritime industry finally recognized that the old way of doing things just wasn't cutting it to stop these fatalities. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive shift. We're moving away from the old standard of just relying on a basic four-gas detector and treating each space as its own isolated bubble. Under the new MSC 581-11 reality, CO2 is officially classified as a primary measurable hazard. That means your detectors absolutely must measure CO2 specifically in parts per million. On top of that, ships are now required to maintain an enclosed space register. You can't just check one cargo hold anymore. You've got to meticulously track connected and adjacent spaces because trapped hazardous atmospheres can secretly bleed right through the boundaries.
So the bottom line is this. Single-person entry into an enclosed space is strictly prohibited. Period. Going it alone is no longer an option under any circumstances whatsoever. These new guidelines are incredibly strict about the fact that an immediate rescue capability, which includes a dedicated attendant maintaining a constant watch and clear communications, must be locked in and ready before anyone even thinks about crossing that threshold.
Moving right along to Section 3, safe entry procedures. Let's talk about how we actually execute this strategy. Because, reading the rules is one thing, but actually executing them out on the deck is completely different. Here is the mandatory enclosed space entry procedure, step by step, so it doesn't sound like a dry manual. First up, you do a thorough risk assessment. Second, you secure a permit to work and keep in mind that is valid for a maximum of 8 hours. Third is atmosphere testing, and this is super critical. You've got to test the top, the middle, and the bottom of the space because those deadly gases stratify into layers. You also need to stop forced ventilation for about 10 minutes before testing to ensure you're getting a true reading.
Fourth, turn the ventilation back on and maintain it. And finally, safe entry with continuous, non-stop personal monitoring.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that very specific number. Exactly 20.9% oxygen by volume is the hard, non-negotiable minimum required for a safe entry. If you look at your detector and it reads 20.7% or 19%, you do not go in. Normal, breathable air is exactly 20.9%, so if that number drops even a fraction, it means something else in that space is actively displacing the oxygen you need to survive.
And it's not just about oxygen. You've got to have steady readings across the board before anyone enters. Let's run through the other non-negotiable atmospheric minimums. Carbon dioxide has to be less than 0.5%, or 5,000 parts per million. Flammable gases need to be safely under 1% of the lower explosive limit. And any toxic gases present must be less than 50% of the occupational exposure limit. If any of these conditions aren't perfectly met, you ventilate and you retest. You literally never just risk it.
That brings us to Section 4, the fatal rescue urge. This is the trap of good intentions.
Look, if you see a crewmate collapse, human nature is going to scream at you to rush right in and save them. We all want to be the hero. But falling for this trap of good intentions is exactly why enclosed space incidents so frequently spiral into multi-fatality accidents. The golden rule here is as simple as it is rigid. Never, ever enter an enclosed space to perform a rescue without the proper equipment. Ad hoc, spur-of-the-moment rescue attempts are a guaranteed death trap. Think about it. If that invisible atmosphere just dropped your crewmate, it's going to drop you too. Running in there without a self-contained breathing apparatus, or SCBA, just guarantees you'll be the next casualty the recovery team has to drag out. You have to fight human nature, take a breath, and follow the protocol. And to combat that very real panic, SOLAS Regulation 3/19.3.6 actually mandates enclosed space rescue drills every 2 months. This isn't just some annoying box-ticking exercise for compliance. The whole point is to build deep muscle memory. Because when a real emergency kicks off, rational thought usually goes straight out the window. Drilling every 2 months ensures that throwing on that SCBA, doing a rapid comms check, and getting the recovery hoist rigged becomes an automatic, unstoppable reflex that overrides your panic.
Let's move to our final section, Section 5, Mandatory Equipment and Training. This is your ultimate shield.
Because let's be honest, the best written procedures in the world are completely useless if you don't actually arm the crew with the right tools and the certified training to use them. So here are the absolute minimum equipment mandates under the new rules. Every single ship must carry at least 2 sets of portable gas detectors, and that jumps up to 4 sets if you're carrying high-risk cargoes. And I really want to stress this again. These detectors must explicitly measure CO2 in parts per million, no exceptions. You also need fully functional SCBAs, heavy-duty lifelines, properly fitted harnesses, and mechanical recovery hoists positioned and ready to go right at the entrance.
But who actually manages all this gear? That falls to the competent person. This is a highly specific, defined role. It's a crew member who has documented theoretical and practical training under their belt. They don't just hold the meter and look at the numbers. They genuinely know how to interpret complex gas readings, they understand the physics of the ship's ventilation, and they are the ones who authorize entry. Crucially, organizational leadership now officially empowers this specific person. If the competent person sees a risk, any risk at all, they have the absolute authority to hit the brakes and stop unsafe work immediately.
And to actually achieve that level of competency, the maritime industry relies heavily on specialized training and logistics partners. Take Draeger Academy Solutions, for example. They offer a great blended approach, doing both on-site and e-learning formats, specifically to train crews on how to operate advanced detectors like their Draeger PAC and XAM series. They run intense, scenario-based confined space entry training. And on a practical level, they offer global port service. So when your ship pulls into port, they handle the whole shebang. They collect the devices, professionally calibrate them, and get them right back to you before departure, so your gear is always perfectly compliant and ready to go.
Which brings us to our final, provocative thought for today. The regulations are written in stone, the equipment is precisely calibrated, and the procedures are crystal clear. But at the end of the day, safety is a team effort, and it's entirely dictated by your shipboard culture. So I want to leave you with this question to chew on. Are you truly empowered to stop the job to save a life? Take a look at your ship's enclosed space register, vigorously test your gear, and always, always watch out for each other. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and please stay safe out there.